Laws and regulations governing transparency for private practice owners are only growing, and whether you like it or not, you are responsible to stay up to date and navigate them. My guest today runs a law firm devoted to helping small businesses and private practices do just that. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they usually want, but care is better, let's face it, when the provider owns the practice, because that's when they're going to have the most freedom to make the clinical decisions they think are best. It's just not quite the same when somebody else owns the practice. Eventually, their agenda starts to creep into the equation, and it's more for the provider to think about. Let's just keep it simple and help them stay private to begin with. My guest today is Michelle Bomberger. Michelle believes that every business deserves to have the same strategic law advantages as mega corporations, and they are not the same. She is the founder and managing attorney of Equinox Business Law Group. Her experience as a business owner and entrepreneur gives Michelle unique insights into the emotional and practical aspects of owning a business and how important legal infrastructure is to growth and success. That's very good points and a lot to say, but thank you for coming on Practice Care because we're going to hear more about what you mean by that today.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, we're going to make this sound interesting because when you hear transparency, let's just say it doesn't sort of leap off the page, but it's important stuff. And I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. Before we quite get into that, though, I'm very repetitive about this. Every guest want to hear more about you. First, the bio I just read, I asked for it to be brief, just so we could kind of get going. But help us get to know you better. Tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I lead my world with entrepreneur before lawyer in many cases. That's really the
Mhm.
part of my world that I'm most passionate about,
Mhm.
both for my own business. I'm a sole practitioner, very similar to the physicians that are listening to this show, but in the legal space.
Mhm.
But running a business, and that's one of the biggest challenges in sort of separating those two aspects of our professional lives. So, but I
Mhm.
love the entrepreneur side, and I love the stories that I get and the experiences that I get to share through working with clients in that area. Beyond that, uh, mother of two teenage kids, one in college, one in high school, here in the Seattle metropolitan area,
Mhm.
and two cats. So that's the story on the personal front.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just kind of came to the world from a business perspective. Undergrad at Notre Dame,
Mhm.
graduate school at Northwestern, did the long version with the JD MBA, and really thought I was going to be a consultant. That's kind of where I thought I was going to go.
Mhm.
And kind of found the business focused lawyer to be much more compelling. And so that sort of led me down about almost 20 years ago now to start this firm and grow it to the general counsel model as kind of an innovative, different way of doing business.
Okay. And so did you work at all for like the mega large law firms, or you never kind of went down that?
I
Because you
didn't. When I
contrast to them. So I'm wondering maybe you sort of did time for a little while and
Yeah,
you can really,
I was fortunate not to. In some ways, that's fortunate. But I did,
yeah.
did work for Mega Corp. So I was at Ernst and Young in their consulting branch right out of undergrad, and then moved to the Seattle area to work for a boutique law firm focused on high tech startups back in the day,
Hmm.
the dot-com boom for those of us old enough to have been in that space.
Might have heard
Um,
of it. Might have heard of it.
Yep, very,
Yeah.
very briefly before that whole thing imploded. And then I spent a few years at AT&T Wireless. And so the megacorps, from that perspective, are the companies that our clients are working with. In this case, essentially, hospitals, insurance providers, things like that, that have legal counsel. They have this general counsel, and smaller
Hmm.
companies are struggling to keep up with how do I negotiate? How do I even compete in this marketplace? Which I
Yeah.
think is one of the big messages that you have here.
Yeah. Yeah. The difference between mega large and small is much more vast than you could, it's game changing. So you are a corporate refugee also. That's the term that I've
Yes.
learned. So let's jump into it. So we're talking about transparency laws, regulations for private practices, and I just want to clear something up. Maybe I'll clear it up. Is it ever a viable defense for anyone to say, I was not aware of that law? I was not aware of that. Can you ever say
Right.
that?
It can be said and it might have some factoring, but it's ultimately going to still be your responsibility. Those penalties are still going to apply whether you knew it or didn't know it because you're supposed to.
You're supposed to, and no matter how big or small you are, right? And the reason I ask is anybody who's listening that says, I'm just a small business, I'm exempt from this. No, you are not. How could I possibly be expected to keep up with such a vast body of law? That's your problem, my friend. And there's different ways to tackle it. So that's why I want you to listen. Like, I don't want anybody to tune out. You have to. I do too. We all do. So we're talking about transparency laws and regulations, more specifically for private practices. What are you seeing? Like, what's new coming down? Like, what are the really important ones, and what are you seeing that's new? Like, what are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think that the big, underlying element here is just a trend toward, regulatory transparency. And
Mhm.
what that then kind of creates and drives is a demand for transparency by everybody else. So if we look, for example, at um, employment laws, right?
Okay.
And now in many states, you're required to disclose certain information about your position, pay rates, benefits, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
as part of your job posting. And so if you're a small company that that law doesn't apply to, like in Washington, it's a 15 employee
Okay.
threshold. Lots of private practices are smaller than that. Um, but the folks looking at the job postings have an expectation that this information is now available. So even if you don't want to do it, or you're not even required to do it,
Yeah, it's true.
from a business competitive standpoint, it's going to make sense that you do it, because otherwise folks are going to be like, well, I'm not even going to try that one because I don't know what it is, and this
Yeah.
isn't in quantity. So the fact that the regulatory transparency is sort of percolating up these requirements for some companies, it's now creating a demand for it across the
Mhm.
board. Um, so we see it a lot in employment right now, and the employment landscape is becoming more and more employee friendly, both at the state and the federal level.
Right.
Um, from removing non-competes, there's a current proposal at the federal level to ban non-competes nationally. Now that's a good question of if and when that would happen, but certainly California, Washington, Colorado, and a number of other states have virtual bans.
Like across
Um,
the board, all applications, no variation of that.
California definitely is, virtually void, non-enforceable.
Okay.
Washington, Colorado have thresholds for where they can be applicable.
Okay.
We're also seeing further protections for whistleblowers and employees, or others, not even only employees, contractors as well, to um, protect bad actors. So right now, confidentiality provisions typically are, you can't say anything about anything, right?
Hmm.
These laws are requiring a carve out to say that if the other party committed some sort of a crime, whether that's a wage and hour violation, or whether that's a sexual assault or sexual harassment or discrimination, those have to be explicitly carved out from confidentiality provisions. So now these things that we've relied on as businesses as tools to protect ourselves, good or bad. I mean, there's
Yeah.
but those are no longer available for us to use.
Okay.
Um, Pay equity is another one that I mentioned around just sort of those disclosures. And then another area, folks are hearing about the Corporate Transparency Act. So the Corporate Transparency
Yeah.
Act is this new federal requirement that explicitly small businesses, which is the part you just mentioned about how do you even know
Yeah.
these things are happening? This is explicitly for smaller companies to have to report their beneficial ownership to the federal government.
Hmm.
For clarity, any company that existed prior to the beginning of 2024 has until the end of 2024 to file. So while there's a lot of conversation about this, businesses that pre-existed don't have an obligation to act until the end of the year. So that kind of helps people calm down, but get it on your calendar and make sure you do it, because the information is gonna taper off and then we're gonna forget.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have that. So just kind of an overall view of these messages that keep coming, these rules that keep coming. And the more that transparency is required, the more your stakeholders are also going to expect it.
Right. Right. So first, a clarification point. So back to the non-disclosure, like the confidentiality agreements. So if I'm under confidentiality with client X and I see them do something that's illegal, in the old world, I guess, air quotes old, I'm have to maintain confidentiality, right? But what you're saying is, no, if you see illegal behavior, that's carved out, and you have an avenue to report that. Or am I out? Is that, did I get it right?
Yeah, so this is
State
state
by
by state,
state. Yeah, yeah.
state by state.
Mhm.
And the interesting part of what the description that you just provided is that your confidentiality provision probably doesn't have that carve out because it was signed, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you try to enforce that confidentiality provision, you'll be penalized. In Washington State, I think it's a $10,000 penalty to even present or try to enforce a non-compliant non-compete or non-just confidentiality provision. The average business owner doesn't even know that this is a thing.
So
And
when you
that
said that, do you mean like if the business that had me under confidentiality tried to enforce that to keep me from reporting them, they would get fined for that. They can't just because it was signed before the law changed. Too bad. Current law applies.
in this case, yes.
In this case, yes. Okay. All
And where we
right.
often see it is in a separation agreement, for example, if someone's giving someone a separation agreement or a severance agreement,
Mhm.
and they've got a confidentiality provision in there, and they don't know that that provision now needs to exclude these factors.
Right.
And that party takes it to a lawyer to review, and all of
Mhm.
a sudden it's like, oh yeah, and by the way, add $10,000 to that severance package. So,
Wait, what? Oh my, yeah, Jesus. And then the other question, so the Transparency Act, the new Transparency Act. So I read the rationale for this, and you're right, it is explicitly for small business. And when I read the rationale, it made sense. It was something about like financial sort of, you know, I'm blanking on the words, but can you explain like why it's here? You know, what's why it exists?
I think so.
I know it's like you start and it'll come back to me, but it
Yeah,
made
no,
sense.
the data shows that it would typically be a smaller entity that is used to funnel funds for money laundering, fraud, supporting terrorism, those types of bad activities.
Mhm.
And so by requiring this filing, they now have information about the beneficial ownership of these companies and can then have further insights around who they are and the risk
Right.
that they may pose.
And the reason that it's typically small mom and pop, small whatevers is because they're really hard for the authorities to track. Right. There's a reason that smart criminals do it this way. And so by reporting everybody, um, it's going to bring more visibility to and make it harder, or better, easier to find.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting just to see how that enforcement is going to play out as well, right?
Yeah.
So presumably they're going to cross list with state databases to understand all the entities that are out there. I can think of, companies that have multiple holding companies or multiple real estate companies. Each of those would be required to file, presumably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, meeting the certain thresholds, and there are a few exemptions as well from the law, but again, it's just an example of sort of this, if you're looking for, privacy and confidentiality of your ownership, you're now having to disclose that ownership as well to the federal
Yeah.
government.
Right. It's a 1-2
Um,
punch. Yeah.
yeah, so it's an interesting one. It'll be, I think, kind of fascinating to see what the enforcement looks like and how they're
Hmm.
how they're going to go about doing that
Yeah.
over
I mean, I
time.
read the requirements. They didn't, to me at least, they didn't sound that terrible, frankly. It's just reporting some demographic information about the owners, um, more or less. But the penalties are steep. Like if you miss this, it's something like $500 a day. I don't know if it was per person or per entity, whatever, but they, that caught my attention. I will tell you, like I will be on time. I'll be
Which I'm sure
early,
is the point.
whatever. Yes, of course
But
it's the point, but
I think
yes.
to your earlier point though, how do smaller companies stay on top of all of this,
Yeah.
right? It's coming down the pike pretty quickly. Some things have a lot more visibility, but if you are heads down just running your business, the chances of this being on your radar, if you're not out at networking events or not out talking to other professionals, the chance of this actually popping up on your radar is pretty low.
Mhm.
And so whether it's, would change to the requirements for confidentiality provisions or job postings or corporate transparency, these things are not on the radar of most small business owners. We're so busy trying to do everything else.
No, when you have a duty to just to keep up with this stuff, that removes the need for any sort of government entity to try to promote the things that they're doing. They don't need to, right? Because it's up to you, the consumer, to be aware of these things. Which takes me to my next question. So You're a private practice owner, you're a private business owner. This is your responsibility, like it or not. You need to have some way to stay on top of it. You call it an attorney on call, and there's any attorney could be on call, right? It just depends on how you do it. But let's face it, at least if the population of people I talk to is at all representative, the challenge with sort of a by the hour attorney is not that, of course they're good, we'll just take as given that they're qualified people. You just don't know how much it's going to cost, and even if it's as important as staying lawful, it just creates this reflex of, well, can you, and the answer is no, I don't know how much it's going to cost. I don't know what this go, I just have to start getting into it, and I'll tell you when I'm done, and here's the invoice for the number of hours. But you have kind of a different model, which I like, and I'd like you to explain it to people, so they can be aware of this model, and just that it's out there.
Yeah, thanks. And what you just described, in addition to having the issues of how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, it's also pretty reactive, right? So,
It is, because you wait forever. Like, all right, somebody
right.
serves you with a letter, like, it's too late. It's not too
Yeah,
late,
so
but it's
no one's
very
calling you
late.
up and saying, hey, don't forget Corporate Transparency Act, because, the last time you called them was a year ago when you had, an employment issue or whatever.
Right.
Um, and so those are exactly the issues that we are really kind of working to solve,
Mhm.
the engagement and building a relationship with counsel. And by having a relationship with counsel, you have someone who knows your business,
Mhm.
knows your risk tolerance, knows your industry's risk tolerance, and is then able to give counsel a lot quicker,
Mhm.
because it's not trying to catch up for what we've done in the business since the last time we talked.
Mhm.
Um, so we call it our general counsel services. And so when you think about how a large company, a megacorp, has a general counsel sitting there getting paid a salary to look out at the landscape of the business, look at the landscape of the industry, what's happening, what do we need to be doing in order to get from point A to point B, which is what our corporate goals are.
Mhm.
Even our small businesses have corporate goals, right?
Mhm.
Um, Small businesses don't have access to that. And
Mhm.
so instead, they've got their, office manager, business manager digging around trying to figure out the answer to how do I file this thing, or how do I comply with this new leave law that just came out, or what does the section of this contract even mean? So everyone is just, trying their best to figure it out, because
Mhm.
calling a lawyer is such a big question mark. Both from a time and value and money standpoint.
Right.
So with our general counsel model, what we do is we tailor it to the business's needs. So we start with a business health assessment. The
Mhm.
business health assessment helps the clients to prioritize the things that are on their plate and understand things that maybe they don't know about. Data privacy is another one that is under the radar. I mean, obviously, healthcare privacy is a huge one, but general consumer data privacy is something that's under the radar for many businesses.
Mhm.
Um, and so that interactive kind of conversation around, like, okay, what are the things that are most important for you right now in your business? And then we package that up along with help for other things that show up. So, hey, we got this contract, can you look at it? Or this employee just came into our office and said, X, what do I do? All
Yeah.
that's all packaged up. So it's a fixed price, all inclusive. We have monthly meetings. We have a quarterly legal update memorandum that says, hey, here's stuff that's coming, and we're going to
Mhm.
make sure these things are taken care of. Your documents will be updated by the end of the month.
Mhm.
So really working to be proactive and to build what I call legal infrastructure for the future. Legal infrastructure might be, making sure that you've got your facilities documented, make sure that you've got your employment documents in place, your corporate governance documents, your succession plan, making sure that all those things are in place so that we're ready. If something goes sideways, we're ready to go.
So it's just more, I don't know, transparency about what they'll be paying, right? Which is, it's unfortunate that it becomes such a big topic of the relationship, but because when it's so uncertain, every time you pick up the phone, it becomes a big topic and it stays there. So you're trying to like get that out of the way, and just, I get it. I totally get it. I remember one of the first things I did is I hired an attorney to write up my like basic terms of service, like with when I work with a client. And I was charged for chit chat. Hey, how are the kids? How's this? And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I wouldn't have chit chatted. Why didn't you? It was, I was so mad. We didn't last much longer after that. I was like, you should have told me that. So you're just sort of washing away this kind of uncertainty.
Yeah, and again, the relationship and that continuity of the relationship really matters. And so then you
Hmm.
can be more proactive. Our job as general counsel is to be more proactive and to help ensure that things are buttoned up before you need them to be buttoned up.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, the unique element. The fixed price also then just sort of says, hey, the rest of my team, whether it's, the owners, the business managers, have the freedom to call and the confidence that they're going to get an answer quickly that is
Hmm.
the right answer. So it's going to
Hmm.
save a bunch of time from the team as well, because they're not having to figure out, we all kind of joke about, using WebMD as our,
Hmm.
medical resource. It's sort of the same thing, um, I don't need a law degree. I have Google, right?
Yeah.
Or now ChatGPT,
Right.
just to add to the mix.
Yeah.
But it's similar, right? That's what we do. We go and search for the answer first in hopes that we don't need to call. But what if you could call first,
Hmm.
knowing that it's already covered, and you save all
Yeah.
that time as well?
Yeah. I remember from my corporate days, the large companies I work for, like the large healthcare, device manufacturers, it just always seemed like in fact, one of the attorneys told me we are told we are to have a very conservative stance on everything, which I'm like, that's different depending on where you go inside the company. And so created these battles, right, between
Yeah.
Department A saying we need to do X and you got to run it by the lawyers, and they kind of just, sort of tamp it down a lot because of their instructions. But so the reason I say that is, do you adopt the risk tolerance level of the clients you work with, or does it become sort of like a flashpoint? How do you figure that one out? It's a big deal. I mean, it affects decisions that you make.
That's actually a really, really great question. And we've talked about it a lot internally. So one of our core values is business first.
Hmm.
And business first is really about, where does this business want to go and need to go,
Hmm.
right? And we need to start with that.
Hmm.
Every business owner has a different risk tolerance. Every industry has a different risk profile.
Hmm.
And so coming at it with, where does this business want to go and how do we help them get there?
Hmm.
There are certainly times that, we have a recommendation and the business says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead.
Hmm.
Um, Often it's not compliance. Sometimes it's compliance. Like, they're willing to take that risk.
Hmm.
Um, but more often than not, it's, hey, I'm going to sign this no matter what, because I'm going to take that business. I'm
Hmm.
not going to give up this business. So I might as well just sign it. It's like, well, you might as well know what it says at least, so that you can be sure that you're covering your
Are you
bases.
sure about
Um,
that? Maybe you could
um,
change sentence 5 and still get the business. Yeah.
so absolutely, it is critical for us to meet our clients where they are from a
Hmm.
risk standpoint. We need to know the law, we need to know what is required, but ultimately it's a business decision in most cases as to whether or not they want to
Yeah.
take one path or another path.
And that was the part that I felt was missing. It was, you, the legal department, this is what I was told, are supposed to help the business side where I was make good business decisions. And so you frame up the legal risks as an input to the decision, but you're not making it. And it just seemed like, nope, you can't do that. That's it. Meeting's
Yeah,
over. Well, wait a second. You know, um, so you're saying that you try to be the advisor rather than the decision maker.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Okay.
and entrepreneurs are, for the most part, a little more risk tolerant than others, right?
Hmm.
And so you kind of have to meet them where they are, and
Right.
be a really good advisor.
Right. It's true because being lawful on law X isn't always black and white. It's not binary, right? There's a couple of options you have, each of which, you're going to give them here's three lawful choices.
Yeah.
But they just have different, yeah, okay, good. Um,
Another great example is, a breach of contract, right? You know,
mm,
generally speaking, we would say breaching a contract is a bad thing, right? We don't want to breach a contract. Are
hmm.
there business reasons to breach a contract? Absolutely.
Hmm.
Are you a bad person or a bad business because you've done it? No, you're making a business decision.
Yeah.
In most cases, again, it's not unlawful. It's a decision that you're making to, whether it's financial, whether it's operational. It's
Right.
probably the lesser of two evils in that case.
Right.
Right? And so that, I think it's a really great example of the fact that it's, most of the time it's not about being unlawful. It's about the right business decision.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Cool. Um, we've covered a lot of ground here. Transparency laws, regulations, you're responsible for keeping your finger on the pulse of the law, which is very large. So you have ways to do that. In the context of all this, just to kind of bring us home, we're sort of on the bite-sized size advice here on practice care. Anything you think I should have asked you about this, what we've talked about, but just didn't think to ask that you think listeners ought to know?
I think that the challenge of how to do this
Hmm.
is a big ask for any small business, right? How
Hmm.
do we stay on top of all these things when it's just us and our small little teams, and things are changing, 100 miles a minute? Um, so I think it's very important for businesses to find resources to give them that information.
Hmm.
Um, Even if it's just a newsletter that you're sure that your business manager is reading every month, that
Hmm.
comes from the state employment office, maybe from Department of Labor. Again, those are really hard to get through sometimes, but figure out what they are.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of fantastic practitioners in the healthcare space around compliance, around financial planning, around tax marketing, who are all spinning up this content because they're paying attention to this content. So
Yeah.
figure out who's talking about these things and make sure that you have one or more ways to get this information, and that you have a team of advisors you can go to when something comes up that you're not really sure about, and you want to make sure that you've got your bases covered,
Hmm.
that you've got your advisory team in place, because it's much better to have that team in place before you need it, than waiting until something happens and you're scrambling to figure out how to get there.
Yeah. Because the scramble is like, well, you better stop everything you're doing. So
Yeah, that's right.
reschedule all those patient appointments, just scramble, 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 whatever else. Yeah. Are there any particular resources that you describe that you think are good?
Um, as I mentioned, I think if you are, located in a state, I think the government, as you mentioned earlier, they're not necessarily, um, it's not in their best interest to necessarily notify you, but I find that for the most part, on the employment side and the tax side, they do a pretty good job of sending updates
Okay.
out that say, here's stuff that's happening. I think when you get to, the federal, compliance issues, I think it's a little harder because
Yeah.
they're coming at you from different angles. And so that's where I think some professionals who are either consultants or advisors in the space,
Hmm.
um, often they'll send out newsletters, and I would just, follow things like that. That
Okay.
would be at least something that would, and make sure you're reading them, because I do know that in my inbox, there's a lot of things that come in that don't get read.
Yeah.
But if that's your source, have a way of complying. And then I think annual audits have certain things in the business that just are subject to annual audits. So, privacy certainly
Hmm.
is one, employment is certainly one, governance. And okay, we're gonna do an annual planning of some sort, and we're gonna go through these 3 to 5 things and make sure that we've checked the boxes on
Right.
compliance for those. So I think just systematizing is
Yeah.
probably the best way to do it.
Makes a lot of sense. Cool. And then the other sort of wrap-up question I ask every guest is, so let's say we've caught a listener's attention on this in the sense of they're like, you know what, she's right. I'm, if I'm honest with myself, I've really been derelict in this. And I want to change that. Sometimes people get enthusiastic about starting something, but they just don't know where to start. So any simple things, I actually have one, but I want to hear what you have to say. Those sort of simple things they could do to kind of get started down this path of just trying to keep their finger on the pulse of all this.
Yeah, I think an audit of what you have, and a kind of checking against best practices to the extent that you have resources to do that. And maybe that's not immediate, but I think just having that on the radar.
Okay.
Um, there are a number of maybe survey type opportunities. We have a business health assessment that we do with
Okay.
our clients, and that's publicly available on our website at equinox.law. And it takes about 5 to 8 minutes to fill out. And you get a 30-page report that covers different parts of your business and says, hey, because you said you're, this kind of entity, here are the requirements. You said you feel not so confident on your employment documents. Here's this data privacy. And so it's a nice summary,
Hmm.
an outline of the kinds of things you should be thinking about as a business.
Hmm.
And I imagine that there are a number of those sitting around, obviously, with their disclaimers. And I should have said at the beginning, what I'm saying here is not legal advice, simply
Right.
general information. Um, but again, I think an annual, or more frequently check in with your advisors, and a compliance audit,
Mhm.
across not only the healthcare specific issues, but also the other areas of your business is probably the best practice that I would encourage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll add a couple. The first one is sort of in defense of the office manager or the practice manager. If you're giving legal documents to your practice manager, unless that person's got some specific legal training background, just stop. We say business manager, the business side is vast. We've got 2 years and no end in sight on the number of topics we're talking about on this podcast because it's endless. And expecting one person to really review that contract and make sure it's up to stuff. I mean, come on. That's, everybody loses in that eventually. Why would you do that? So find experts, number one. Number two, I'd say find healthcare specific experts like Michelle's firm, or, we've talked about. General business law is different than healthcare law, and expecting a general business attorney to be expert on healthcare law, as one example, it's a bad road. I wouldn't do it. It's going to bite you. So find the experts. I think the way, Michelle, you said it is systematize it, an annual check, very, very doable. It seems very reasonable. Not that it's not intense while you're doing it, but it's not like it's dominating the whole year. And these are business processes. Like we said at the beginning, you're responsible to know whether you like that or not, no matter how big or small you are. So, that, what you said, I think makes a lot of sense. So thank you. And thank you for coming on Practice Care and opening some eyes to this. I really hope we have. I'm a little more nervous, but in a good way, because I'm as subject to all these things as anybody else is. So we'll be checking this out. But thanks for taking some time, Michelle, to come on Practice Care. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Carl. It was really great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And a couple of quick points before we end the show. First, all the contact information, Michelle, that you provided for you is going to be in the show notes for your episode. And so that's just another way for anybody who wants to get a hold of you to do so. If you are someone like Michelle's firm or Michelle or us, and you serve private practice owners, or if you're a private practice owner yourself and you've got some experience on the business side of private practice, either way that you think others would benefit from, please, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it in the show notes for Michelle's episode and every episode. There's a link, a couple of clicks, really easy. Just tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to Practice Care. We have a new episode every week. It's the easiest way to stay up to date is by subscribing. Just search Practice Care, one word, and you will find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, every player and platform. We're there. It's easy to find us. Please subscribe. Thanks very much, and until next time.